Picture Japan. What do you see? Futuristic cityscapes, neon lights, bullet trains? Or maybe serene temples, cherry blossoms, and samurai warriors in full armor? It's a land of incredible contrasts, a place that feels both ancient and hypermodern. But have you ever wondered how it all began? What was Japan before anime, before sushi, before the very first samurai drew his sword? To find the answer, we have to travel back in time, way back, to a land shaped not by architects and engineers, but by fire and water. Imagine an archipelago, a long chain of islands forged by volcanoes, constantly shaken by earthquakes and lashed by typhoons. This is prehistoric Japan. A beautiful, but dangerous place. This very geography, however, gave its first inhabitants a unique advantage: isolation. Surrounded by the sea, these islands were a natural fortress, shielded from the constant wars and migrations that swept across the Asian continent. It was in this isolated cradle that one of the world's most distinct cultures would begin to form. Let's meet the first Japanese people we know by name, the Jōmon. The name itself means cord-marked, which refers to the unique patterns they pressed into their pottery. And this wasn't just any pottery, it's among the oldest ever discovered in the world, dating back over 10,000 years. Think about that. While people in other parts of the world were just beginning to figure out farming, the Jōmon people were already crafting intricate clay pots. They were expert hunter-gatherers, living in deep connection with their environment. They hunted deer and boar in the dense forests, fished in the rich coastal waters, and gathered nuts, berries, and edible plants. They lived in simple pit dwellings, often grouped into small settlements. Their world was one of spirits, nature, and community. For thousands of years, the Jōmon culture thrived in relative isolation, a long, slow dance with the seasons. It was a stable, sustainable way of life that lasted for an astonishingly long time. But nothing lasts forever. Around 300 BCE, a new wave of change began to wash over the islands. New people started arriving from the Asian mainland, likely from the Korean peninsula. They brought with them a revolutionary technology that would change Japan forever: wet rice farming. These newcomers are known as the Yayoi people. Unlike the Jōmon's foraging lifestyle, cultivating rice in flooded paddies required a whole new way of organizing society. It demanded cooperation, planning, and a lot of hard work. You needed to build irrigation canals, manage water levels, and work together to plant and harvest the crop. But the payoff was huge. Rice provided a stable, abundant food source that could support much larger populations. Along with rice, the Yayoi also brought metallurgy. First bronze, then iron. Suddenly, tools were no longer just made of stone and bone. Iron axes could clear forests more efficiently, and iron-tipped plows could till the land more effectively. Bronze was used for ceremonial objects like bells and mirrors, suggesting a new level of ritual and social hierarchy. This agricultural revolution had a ripple effect across all aspects of life. As villages grew larger and more permanent, society became more complex. The concept of land ownership became critical. Who controlled the best rice paddies? Who managed the water supply? Suddenly, there was a reason to fight. The surplus of rice also meant that not everyone had to be a farmer. Specialized artisans, warriors, and leaders began to emerge. Society started to stratify. Powerful families, or clans, began to exert control over land and people. They built fortified settlements, often on hilltops, a clear sign of increasing conflict. Archaeology shows us a darker side to this period. Skeletons with battle wounds and weapons buried in graves become more common. The peaceful, egalitarian world of the Jōmon was fading, replaced by a more competitive, hierarchical society. These powerful clans, known as uji, weren't just political or military units, they were also religious ones. Each clan worshipped its own ancestral god, or kami, and the clan chief acted as both a warrior leader and a high priest. They vied for power, forming alliances and fighting brutal wars to expand their territory and influence. Japan was no longer a collection of small, scattered villages, but a patchwork of competing chiefdoms. Out of this chaotic landscape of warring clans, a few powerful groups began to dominate entire regions. They formed loose tribal alliances, the first glimmer of a larger political entity, a step towards a unified state. They weren't a nation yet, not even close. But the seeds were planted. Japan was on the verge of a monumental transformation. In this fierce competition for supremacy, one clan, in one particular region, would eventually rise above all others. They wouldn't just claim to be the strongest, they would claim something far more profound. They would declare a divine connection to the most powerful kami of all, the sun goddess herself. This single clan would step forward and say, "We are the center of Japan." And their descendants, against all odds, would sit on the chrysanthemum throne all the way to the present day. The story of how this one family forged a nation and created the world's oldest continuous monarchy is where our journey takes us next. Imagine a leader, standing on a misty plain in ancient Japan, gazing up at the rising sun. He isn't just the chief of a small village, he sees something bigger. He envisions a single, unified nation stretching across these islands, a land where the sun itself would be proud to set its throne. This dream, this vision, would ignite the creation of Japan's very first state, a story of ambition, adaptation, and the birth of an empire. Welcome to our journey through Japanese history. Today, we're exploring how a group of powerful clans, led by one dominant force, forged a nation from a patchwork of rival territories. This is the story of the Yamato court. In the heart of Japan's main island, Honshu, a powerful group was on the rise. We call them the Yamato clan. Now, this wasn't a sudden conquest with swords and fire. Think of it more like a gradual, strategic unification. The Yamato leaders were exceptional politicians and diplomats. They didn't just dominate, they formed alliances, absorbed smaller clans through marriage and negotiation, and slowly built a network of loyalty that stretched across central Japan. They offered stability and a shared identity to a land that had long been divided. Over generations, their influence grew until they were recognized as the paramount authority, the central family from which an emperor would eventually emerge. It was a slow burn, a steady consolidation of power that laid the foundation for everything that was to come. But how do you go from being the most powerful clan to being the rulers of a true state? You need a system. And the Yamato leaders were smart enough to look beyond their own shores for inspiration. At this time, the Asian mainland was a vibrant hub of civilization, with sophisticated empires possessing centuries of knowledge in law, philosophy, and administration. Instead of reinventing the wheel, the Yamato court actively sought out these ideas. They welcomed scholars, monks, and artisans from neighboring regions eager to learn. One of the most revolutionary adoptions was a writing system. Before this, history was oral, laws were tradition, and messages were simple. Suddenly, with written characters, they could record their history, codify laws, and create a complex bureaucracy. This was a game changer. They also embraced new philosophical and spiritual ideas, which offered profound insights into governance, ethics, and the nature of the universe. This cultural exchange wasn't just imitation, it was a deliberate and selective process of adaptation. The Yamato court took these powerful tools from the mainland and began to reshape them, fitting them to their own unique cultural context. With these new tools in hand, the real work of state building began. The Yamato court set about creating a structured, centralized government, a far cry from the old clan-based system. They drew inspiration from the grand administrative models of established Asian empires, creating a hierarchy of ranks and titles for officials. Your position in the court was no longer just about your bloodline, it was about your official rank within this new government structure. This system, known as the Ritsuryo system, was a complex web of penal and administrative codes. It defined everything from land ownership and taxation to the duties of every government official, from the highest minister down to the provincial governor. This created a direct line of authority from the central court to the furthest reaches of its domain. For the first time, a unified legal and administrative framework governed the islands. The emperor was placed firmly at the apex of this structure, not just as a clan leader, but as a sovereign ruler, a divine figurehead for this new, organized state. Power was being centralized, organized, and projected across the land in a way that had never been seen before. A new state needs a new capital, a symbol of its power and prestige. The Yamato court understood this well. They moved away from the tradition of relocating the capital with each new ruler's reign and decided to build permanent, grand cities. The most magnificent of these was Heian-kyō, which we know today as Nara. This wasn't just any city. It was meticulously planned, designed on a grid system modeled after the great mainland capitals. It featured wide avenues, grand palaces, and towering temples. Nara was a statement. It was the physical embodiment of the new centralized state, an urban center for politics, religion, and culture. Yet, even in its grand design, it wasn't a simple copy. The architecture was adapted to local tastes and materials, blending continental grandeur with a distinct Japanese aesthetic. Within its walls, a vibrant courtly culture blossomed. Aristocrats, officials, poets, and monks gathered, creating a cosmopolitan hub where art and ideas from across Asia mingled and were transformed. Nara was more than just a capital, it was the crucible where a unique Japanese identity was being forged. As new ideas flowed into Japan, they encountered the island's ancient, native spiritual traditions. This could have been a source of great conflict, but instead, something remarkable happened, a process of harmonization began. The native beliefs, a collection of rituals and reverence for nature spirits known as kami, didn't disappear. This indigenous path is what would later be known as Shinto, the way of the gods. Instead of clashing, the new spiritual practices from the mainland, particularly Buddhism, found a way to coexist and even blend with Shinto. Buddhist deities were sometimes seen as manifestations of local kami, and vice versa. Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples were often built in close proximity, creating a sacred landscape where different beliefs complemented each other. The imperial court itself became a patron of both traditions. The emperor would perform ancient Shinto rites to ensure the harmony of the land and its people, while also championing the construction of magnificent Buddhist temples to secure spiritual protection for the state. This beautiful syncretism, this blending of beliefs, created a rich and uniquely Japanese spiritual tapestry that endures to this day. It was a testament to a culture that valued harmony over conflict, integration over exclusion. So, the Yamato court has succeeded. It has built a stable, centralized state. The emperor sits on a throne in a magnificent capital, presiding over a sophisticated bureaucracy. The lands are unified, taxes are being collected, and laws are being enforced. With the foundations of the state secure, the focus of the court began to shift inward, from governance to refinement, from politics to aesthetics. A golden age of courtly culture was dawning. The aristocrats in the capital dedicated themselves to the pursuit of elegance and beauty. Life became a performance of refined taste, expressed through intricate poetry, exquisite calligraphy, and subtle romantic intrigues. The air was filled with the scent of incense and the sound of whispered verses. But while the nobles in the capital were composing poems about cherry blossoms and fleeting love, a different kind of power was quietly taking root in the provinces. To manage their vast estates and protect their interests far from the capital, these same aristocrats began to rely on a class of skilled local managers and protectors. These were practical men, more comfortable with a sword than a writing brush. They were the seeds of a new force, one that was growing in the shadows of the court's glittering world. While the poets wrote of beauty, this emerging protector class was honing the skills of war. The stage was being set for a dramatic shift in power, one that would eventually challenge the very foundation of the elegant world the court had so carefully built. Picture this: in the glittering capital of Heian-kyō, a noble might spend his entire morning choosing the perfect color for his sleeve, ensuring it flawlessly complements the shade of the autumn leaves outside his window. It's a world of refined taste, exquisite poetry, and intricate social rules. But while this aristocrat is perfecting his aesthetic, hundreds of miles away, armed men are learning a much simpler way to settle disputes, with the cold, hard edge of steel. This is the great paradox of the Heian era. Our story begins in the year 794, when Emperor Kammu decided to move the capital one last time. He was looking for a fresh start, away from the meddling Buddhist monasteries of Nara. He chose a spot nestled in a mountain-ringed basin, a place he called Heian-kyō, the capital of peace and tranquility. We know it today as Kyoto. And for the next 400 years, this city would be the heart of a uniquely Japanese civilization. At first, the emperor was firmly in charge. But soon, a new power emerged, not through force, but through clever political maneuvering. Meet the Fujiwara clan. They weren't emperors, but they might as well have been. Their strategy was brilliant and simple: they married their daughters to emperors. When a Fujiwara daughter gave birth to a son, that boy would become the next emperor. And who would guide the young emperor, ruling on his behalf as regent? His Fujiwara grandfather or uncle, of course. For centuries, the Fujiwara clan held the real power, controlling the throne from behind a silken curtain. With politics handled by the Fujiwara, the rest of the nobility was free to pursue a life dedicated to beauty and refinement. This was the golden age of Japanese court culture. It was a world almost entirely self-contained within the capital, a bubble of extreme luxury. Everything was about taste. The wrong shade of robe, a clumsy line of poetry, or a poorly chosen flower for a bouquet could lead to social ruin. This obsession with aesthetics gave birth to some of the world's greatest literature. Court ladies, with little else to occupy their time, became prolific writers. One of them, Murasaki Shikibu, wrote a masterpiece that would define the era, the Tale of Genji. Often called the world's first novel, it's a sprawling, psychologically complex story about the romantic escapades of the shining prince Genji. But it's more than just a romance, it's a deep dive into the emotions and anxieties of the Heian court. Alongside novels, diaries and poetry flourished. Men and women alike were expected to be able to compose waka poems at a moment's notice, often to send messages to lovers or comment on a beautiful natural scene. This literature is saturated with a unique Japanese aesthetic known as mono no aware. It's a difficult phrase to translate, but it means a gentle, wistful sadness at the transience of things. It's the bittersweet feeling you get when you see cherry blossoms in full bloom, knowing that in just a few days, they'll be gone. It's the beauty found in imperfection and impermanence. The Heian courtiers lived and breathed this feeling, finding profound meaning in the fleeting moments of life. Life in the capital was a never-ending series of ceremonies, poetry contests, and elaborate rituals. An aristocrat's day might be filled with incense judging competitions, moon viewing parties, and secret romantic liaisons. Their world was governed by a complex calendar of festivals and rites. It was a life of incredible privilege and sophistication, completely detached from the concerns of ordinary people. But here's the problem with living in a bubble: you can see what's happening on the outside. While the nobles in Heian-kyō were worried about the proper layering of colored robes, the rest of Japan was becoming a very different place. The central government's control over the provinces was slipping. Powerful clans and wealthy monasteries began to build up vast private estates, or shōn, far from the capital. These estates were often exempt from taxes and acted like little independent kingdoms. And how did the owners of these estates, many of them nobles living back in the capital, protect their property and enforce their will? They didn't do it themselves. They hired professional warriors. These were men from the countryside, skilled in archery and horsemanship. They were practical, tough, and lived by a code of loyalty and martial prowess. They were the men who settled things with steel. They were called samurai. Initially, these warriors were just hired muscle. They were seen by the court aristocrats as crude, uncultured provincials, necessary, perhaps, but certainly not their social equals. The nobles in Kyoto looked down on these rough men with disdain, considering them little more than glorified security guards. They couldn't imagine a world where these warriors held any real power. But as the court grew more decadent and inward-looking, its actual power drained away. The government couldn't effectively collect taxes or maintain order in the provinces anymore. So, who did people turn to for protection and justice? Not the distant emperor or the poem-writing courtiers, but the local warrior chief. The samurai began to build their own power bases, their own networks of loyalty, and their own sense of identity. They were becoming more than just guards. They were becoming a new ruling class in waiting. The court was blissfully unaware. They were too busy playing their elegant games, wrapped up in the ephemeral beauty of Mono no Aware. They failed to see that the very foundation of their peaceful world was cracking. They had outsourced their security, their power, their connection to the real, gritty world outside the capital. They had created a class of professional fighters, and now those fighters were realizing that they didn't have to listen to their pampered employers in Kyoto. The elegant, refined world of the Heian court was a beautiful dream. But it was a dream that couldn't last. The gap between the capital and the countryside, between the pen and the sword, had grown too wide. The end of the Heian period is the story of this bubble bursting. And so, we arrive at our cliffhanger. While the nobles are busy writing love poems, trying to capture the fleeting beauty of a dewdrop on a leaf, the rough men they hired for protection are sharpening their swords. They've learned their own worth and power. They are about to write a new chapter of Japanese history, not with delicate ink on scented paper, but with blades of steel on the battlefield. The age of the courtier is about to end, and the age of the warrior is about to begin. Imagine being the emperor of a vast and powerful nation. You are revered as a living god, a descendant of the sun goddess herself. Your word is law, your authority absolute. But one day, you wake up to a terrifying realization: the person who actually decides the fate of your country isn't you. It's the guy with the biggest sword and the most loyal army. Welcome to Heian, Japan, where the age of the elegant courtier is about to be brutally ended by the age of the warrior. Last time, we talked about how the samurai began as hired muscle for aristocrats and landowners. Well, that muscle got stronger and smarter. Two clans, in particular, grew so powerful they cast shadows over the entire imperial court, the Taira and the Minamoto. Think of them as the Starks and Lannisters of ancient Japan, but with more katanas and less incest. Their rivalry wasn't just a squabble, it was a seismic struggle for the soul of the nation. For decades, they clashed in a series of violent conflicts, turning the countryside into a chessboard of loyalty and betrayal. This power struggle exploded into the Genpei War, a 5-year-long civil war that tore Japan apart. It was a saga of epic battles, naval clashes, and heroic last stands. The stories from this war would become the foundation of samurai legend for centuries to come. In the end, one man emerged victorious from the ashes and the blood, Minamoto no Yoritomo. He was cunning, ruthless, and a brilliant strategist. He didn't just defeat the Taira clan, he utterly annihilated them, ensuring they could never challenge him again. But Yoritomo had a bigger ambition than just being the most powerful warlord. He wanted to fundamentally change how Japan was governed. He knew that simply controlling the emperor from the shadows wasn't enough, the old system was broken. So, in 1192, he did something revolutionary. He forced the emperor to grant him a new title, say Taishogun, or Great General who subdues the barbarians. We just call it shogun. Yoritomo then moved his government from the imperial capital of Kyoto to his own military stronghold in Kamakura. This created the Kamakura shogunate, Japan's first military government. And with it, a strange and uniquely Japanese dual power system was born. The emperor in Kyoto remained the divine, symbolic head of state. He was still the high priest of the Shinto religion, performing sacred rites and lending legitimacy to the government. But the real power, the military, the police, the courts, and the taxes, was now firmly in the hands of the shogun in Kamakura. Japan now had 2 capitals and 2 rulers, a divine figurehead and a military dictator. This new order transformed Japanese society. The elegant poetry and courtly intrigue of the Heian period gave way to the stark realities of feudalism. At the top was the shogun. Beneath him were powerful regional lords called daimyo, who swore loyalty to him. The daimyo, in turn, had their own loyal samurai vassals, who administered their lands and fought their battles. And at the bottom of this pyramid were the peasants, who worked the land and paid the taxes that funded this whole military apparatus. A warrior's honor, loyalty to one's lord, and skill in battle became the most valued virtues in the land. The way of the warrior, or bushido, began to take shape. For nearly a century, this system, while harsh, brought a degree of stability to Japan. The shogunate kept the ambitious lords in check and the country relatively peaceful. But in the late 13th century, an unprecedented threat appeared on the horizon. From the west came envoys of Kublai Khan, the mighty ruler of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. His message was simple: submit to me, or be destroyed. The samurai, proud and independent, told him to get lost. So Kublai Khan sent his fleet. In 1274, a massive Mongol, Chinese, and Korean force of over 900 ships and 40,000 men descended upon Japan's southern shores. The samurai had never faced a foreign invasion before. They were used to one-on-one duels and ritualized warfare. The Mongols fought as a coordinated, disciplined army, using massed archers, bombs, and overwhelming numbers. The samurai were pushed back, fighting desperately for every inch of ground. It looked like Japan might fall. And then, a miracle. A sudden, violent typhoon slammed into the coast, smashing the Mongol fleet to pieces and forcing the invaders to retreat. The Japanese were saved. Kublai Khan, not one to give up easily, tried again 7 years later, in 1281. This time, his invasion force was even larger, an estimated 4,400 ships and 140,000 men, one of the largest naval invasions in history until D-Day. The Japanese were better prepared this time. They had spent years building a massive stone wall along the coast of Hakata Bay, the most likely landing spot. For weeks, the samurai held the Mongols at the wall, preventing them from establishing a proper beachhead. The battle raged, a bloody stalemate. And then, once again, the heavens intervened. An even more powerful typhoon, a storm of legendary fury, roared through the strait. The Mongol armada was utterly annihilated. The few who survived the storm were easily picked off by the samurai. Japan had done the impossible. They had defeated the unstoppable Mongol war machine, not once, but twice. The grateful nation called these miraculous storms the kamikaze, the divine winds. It seemed like the gods themselves were protecting Japan. The victory solidified the samurai's role as the protectors of the nation and reinforced Japan's sense of its own divine destiny. But this divine victory came at a very worldly price. Defending against the Mongols had been astronomically expensive. The shogunate had to finance the building of walls, the mobilization of armies, and years of coastal defense. After the war, the thousands of samurai who had fought and bled expected to be rewarded with land or money, as was customary. But there was a problem: this wasn't a civil war where you could just seize the loser's land. The enemy was at the bottom of the sea. The government had no new territory to hand out. They were broke. The shogunate tried its best, but it couldn't pay its bills. The samurai who had saved the country were left empty-handed, growing resentful and disillusioned. Their loyalty to the Kamakura government, once ironclad, began to rust. The daimyo, the powerful regional lords, saw the central government's weakness and started to think about their own ambitions again. The divine winds had saved Japan from a foreign threat, but they had also planted the seeds of internal collapse. The bill for victory was coming due, and as money dried up and loyalties frayed, the country began its slow, inevitable slide back toward chaos and civil war.
Imagine for a moment that every single prefecture in modern Japan suddenly declared independence. Each one becomes its own tiny country, with its own government, its own army, its own ambitions. And every single one of them, from Hokkaido to Okinawa, believes it has the right to rule all of Japan. That's the reality of the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. It's a period of absolute chaos, relentless ambition, and some of the most dramatic stories in all of Japanese history. How did Japan go from the refined world of the samurai we've seen so far to a nationwide, no-holds-barred cage match for survival? Let's find out. Our story picks up after the fall of the Kamakura shogunate. A new power rises to take its place: the Ashikaga clan. They established their own shogunate, setting up their base not in Kamakura, but in the heart of imperial power. Kyoto, you'd think this would give them more control, being right next to the emperor. But you'd be wrong. From the very beginning, the Ashikaga shogunate was shaky. The local warrior lords, the daimyo, had tasted power during the fall of Kamakura, and they weren't eager to give it up. The Ashikaga shoguns were more like first among equals, constantly having to negotiate and balance the power of these increasingly independent lords. They never achieved the same level of nationwide authority that the Kamakura regime had at its peak. It was a government built on a foundation of sand, and it was only a matter of time before the tides of war washed it all away. For over 100 years, the Ashikaga managed to hold on, presiding over a flourishing of culture known as the Muromachi period. Zen Buddhism, ink-wash painting, tea ceremonies. No theateral of these iconic elements of Japanese culture blossomed under their patronage. But beneath this elegant surface, the political situation was festering. The powerful daimyo clans were building up their own power bases in the provinces, often ignoring the shogun's decrees entirely. The shogunate was losing its grip, and the whole country was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came in 1467. It wasn't a foreign invasion or a peasant rebellion that lit the fuse, but a family squabble within the shogunate itself. A dispute over who would be the next shogun spiraled out of control, dragging the most powerful daimyo clans in the country into a conflict known as the Dunyin War. This wasn't a war fought in distant fields. It was fought in the streets of the capital, Kyoto. For over a decade, the city became a brutal battlefield. Temples, palaces, and entire neighborhoods were burned to the ground. The once glittering capital of Japan was reduced to rubble and ash. When the smoke finally cleared, there was no real winner. But there was one very clear loser: the Ashikaga shogunate. The win in war completely shattered what little central authority was left. The shogun was now a puppet, a powerless figurehead with no army and no real influence outside the burned-out shell of his own palace. The message to every ambitious daimyo across the country was crystal clear: there is no one in charge. The throne of Japan is empty. If you want power, you have to take it yourself. And with that, the floodgates opened. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of the country at war, had officially begun. This wasn't just a change in politics. It was a fundamental change in the rules of society. The old hierarchies and loyalties were thrown out the window. This was an era of Gikokyo, a Japanese term that means the low overthrowing the high. A loyal vassal might assassinate his own lord and take his castle. A minor samurai could, through skill and ruthlessness, rise to become a powerful daimyo. A peasant with a spear could change the course of a battle. Your birth no longer mattered as much as your ambition and your ability to win. It was a time of incredible social mobility, but also of unparalleled betrayal and violence. Alliances were made one day and broken the next. A daimyo might go to bed as the ruler of a province and wake up a headless corpse. Warfare itself transformed. The classic image of the honorable samurai duel was replaced by the brutal reality of mass warfare. Armies swelled in size, composed not just of samurai, but of thousands of ashigaru, or foot soldiers, armed with long pikes called yari. Castles evolved from simple wooden forts into massive, multi-layered stone fortresses designed to withstand long sieges and the new threat of gunpowder. Speaking of which, in 1543, a group of Portuguese merchants shipwrecked on a southern Japanese island, introducing firearms to the country for the first time. The Japanese were incredibly quick to adopt and improve upon this new technology. Within a few decades, they were mass-producing matchlock muskets called Tanegashima. And these guns would forever change the face of the samurai battlefield. The Sengoku period is the Japan you've probably seen in movies, anime, and video games. It's the world of legendary castle sieges, where defenders would hold out for months against overwhelming odds. It's the origin of the ninja, the shadowy spies and assassins employed by daimyo to gain any advantage they could. It's an era filled with larger-than-life figures, each with their own unique story. There's Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, and his lifelong rival was Sugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Ikaigo, whose battles at Kawanakajima are the stuff of legend. There's the One-Eyed Dragon, Date Masamune, a brilliant and flamboyant young lord from the north. Every one of these dozens of daimyo was fighting for their own survival, for their clan's honor, and for the ultimate prize, unifying the entire country under their own banner. For nearly a century, Japan was a chaotic patchwork of warring domains. No single daimyo seemed capable of gaining a decisive advantage. They would conquer a neighbor's province, only to have their own lands invaded from the other side. It was a bloody stalemate, a cycle of violence that seemed destined to tear the country apart forever. But out of this chaos, a new generation of leaders began to emerge. These were men who didn't play by the old rules. They were pragmatic, innovative, and utterly ruthless. They saw the fractured state of Japan not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. And three names, above all others, would rise from the fray to define the end of this bloody era. The first was a minor lord from the province of Owari, a man known for his eccentric behavior and his brutal, revolutionary tactics. His name was Oda Nobunaga. The second was a peasant's son who started as Nobunaga's sandal-bearer and rose through the ranks with sheer cunning and charisma. His name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And the third was a patient, calculating daimyo who had spent his youth as a political hostage, learning to wait for the perfect moment to strike. His name was Tokugawa Ieyasu. These three men, often called the Three Great Unifiers, would write the final, bloody chapter of the Sengoku Jidai. But their path to unification wouldn't be through philosophy or diplomacy. They were about to flip the entire board, shattering the old world and forging a new Japan in fire and steel. The ultimate endgame for control of Japan had begun. Have you ever heard the old Japanese saying about the cuckoo bird? If it won't sing, what do you do? Well, three of Japan's most legendary figures had very different answers. The first, Oda Nobunaga, would say, "Kill it." The second, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, would say, "Make it sing." And the third, Tokugawa Ieyasu, would simply say, "I will wait for it to sing." This isn't just a riddle about a bird. It's the story of how three men with three radically different personalities dragged Japan out of a century of brutal civil war and unified it under a single rule. This is the story of the end of the samurai's constant warfare and the dawn of a new era. For over 100 years, Japan had been tearing itself apart. The Sengoku period, or the Age of Warring States, was a chaotic free-for-all where powerful regional lords, known as daimyo, F-O-U-G-H-T, relentlessly for land and power. The old authority of the emperor and the shogun in Kyoto had all but vanished. It was a time of betrayal, bloodshed, and constant uncertainty, where a farmer's field could become a battlefield overnight. Into this violent storm stepped a man who was as ruthless as the era he was born into, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga wasn't just another ambitious warlord. He was a revolutionary, a visionary who saw the old ways as an obstacle to be demolished. While his rivals clung to traditional samurai tactics, Nobunaga eagerly adopted new technology. He was one of the first Japanese leaders to see the devastating potential of firearms, importing arquebuses from Portuguese traders. He armed his ashigaru, or foot soldiers, with these guns and trained them to fire in coordinated volleys. In the pivotal Battle of Nagashino in 1575, his gunners absolutely annihilated the famed cavalry charge of the Takeda clan. A shocking victory that announced to all of Japan that a new kind of warfare had arrived. But his innovation wasn't limited to the battlefield. Nobunaga was notoriously brutal. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he eradicated them. He held a deep contempt for the powerful Buddhist monastic complexes which functioned like independent fortresses with their own warrior monks. In 1571, he surrounded the sacred Mount Hiei, home to the influential Inryakuji Monastery, and burned it to the ground, slaughtering thousands of men, women, and children. His goal was absolute power, and he allowed neither tradition nor religion to stand in his way. He adopted the motto Tenka Fubu, which roughly translates to rule the realm by force. By the early 1580s, Nobunaga controlled the central heartland of Japan and was well on his way to conquering the rest. But his brutal methods had earned him countless enemies. In 1582, at the height of his power, he was betrayed. One of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, surrounded him at Hanaji Temple in Kyoto. Trapped and with no hope of escape, Nobunaga committed seppuku, ending his violent reign in a blaze of fire. The bird killer was dead. Just as Japan seemed poised to fall back into chaos, another man stepped forward to finish what Nobunaga had started. This was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and his story is one of the most incredible rags to riches tales in all of history. Hideyoshi started his life as a peasant, so lowborn he didn't even have a family name. He was said to have been a sandal-bearer for Oda Nobunaga, but his sharp intellect and cunning political skills saw him rise rapidly through the ranks. When news of Nobunaga's death reached him, Hideyoshi acted with lightning speed. He defeated the traitor Akechi Mitsuhide and, in the ensuing power vacuum, masterfully outmaneuvered Nobunaga's other vassals and even his own sons to become the undisputed heir to his legacy. Where Nobunaga ruled through fear and destruction, Hideyoshi ruled through a combination of force and brilliant diplomacy. He was a master negotiator, persuading many rival daimyo to submit to his authority without a fight. He completed the unification of Japan that Nobunaga had begun, bringing the powerful clans of the West and North under his control. But Hideyoshi was also determined to prevent the kind of social mobility that had allowed him, a peasant, to become the most powerful man in the land. He instituted a rigid, four-tiered class system, with the samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants at the bottom. He famously conducted a sword hunt, disarming the entire peasantry to ensure that only the samurai could wield weapons. This locked Japanese society into a strict hierarchy that would endure for centuries. He made the cuckoo sing his tune. But Hideyoshi's ambition didn't stop at Japan's borders. Now the master of a unified nation with a massive army of veteran samurai, he turned his sights outward. In 1592, and again in 1597, he launched two massive invasions of Korea, with the ultimate, grandiose goal of conquering Ming China itself. These campaigns were incredibly bloody and devastating for the Korean peninsula. While the Japanese forces initially saw success, they were ultimately bogged down by fierce Korean resistance, led by legendary figures like Admiral Ye Sun-sin and his turtle ships, and by the intervention of a massive Ming Chinese army. The invasions were a costly failure that drained Japan's resources and achieved nothing. In 1598, with his army still stuck in Korea, Hideyoshi died, his dream of a continental empire unrealized. With Hideyoshi's death, the final member of our trio takes center stage, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu was the ultimate survivor, a man of incredible patience and strategic foresight. He had been an ally first to Nobunaga, and then a reluctant but powerful vassal to Hideyoshi. While Hideyoshi was wasting Japan's strength in Korea, Ieyasu was quietly consolidating his own power base in the eastern Kanto region, building up his domain around his new castle town of Edo, the future city of Tokyo. He had watched the other two titans rise and fall, and he had learned from their mistakes. He didn't rush, he waited. After Hideyoshi's death, the Council of Regents he had appointed to rule until his young son came of age quickly fractured. Ieyasu, as the most powerful member, emerged as the leader of one faction, while another rallied around those loyal to the Toyotomi heir. The inevitable showdown came in the year 1600, at a place called Sekigahara. This was the largest and most important samurai battle in Japanese history. On a foggy morning, over 160,000 warriors clashed. Ieyasu's victory wasn't just won by force of arms, but by his typical cunning. He had secretly secured promises from several enemy generals to betray their side mid-battle. At the critical moment, they switched their allegiance, and the Toyotomi loyalist army collapsed. The Battle of Sekigahara was decisive. It made Ieyasu the undisputed master of Japan. 3 years later, in 1603, the emperor bestowed upon him the title of shogun. Ieyasu established his government not in the old imperial capital of Kyoto, but in his own stronghold of Edo. This marked the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, a dynasty that would rule Japan for over 250 years. Ieyasu and his successors systematically dismantled the old chaotic system. They forced the daimyo to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families behind as hostages, a clever system to drain their wealth and prevent rebellion. They finalized the rigid class structure Hideyoshi had started, binding the samurai to their lords and turning them from warriors into a bureaucratic ruling class. The constant warfare was finally over. The patient man had waited, and now the bird was singing for him. Japan was finally at peace. For the first time in centuries, the swords of the samurai were sheathed. The warring states were united, and a period of unprecedented stability and peace, known as the Edo period, began. But this peace came at a very specific price. To ensure no outside forces could ever disrupt their hard-won control, the Tokugawa shoguns would soon make a momentous decision. They would choose to turn their backs on the rest of the world, closing Japan's borders and beginning a period of over 2 centuries of near-total isolation. The long peace had arrived, but it would be a peace kept behind closed doors. Imagine a world frozen in time, while Europe is churning with the steam and steel of the Industrial Revolution. On the other side of the globe, Japan is a land of elegant samurai, their twin swords a symbol of an unchanging order. By day, they practice the art of war. By night, they might be found in the vibrant, lantern-lit districts, enjoying the drama of a kabuki play. This wasn't some fantasy novel. This was the reality of the Edo period, a fascinating century-long chapter of Japanese history that created a unique and self-contained universe. How did this happen? And what was it really like to live inside this bubble of peace and isolation? It all began with one man's vision for ultimate stability. After a century of brutal civil war, the victor Tokugawa Ieyasu established a new shogunate, a military government, in the year 1603. His primary goal was simple: no more war. To achieve this, the Tokugawa clan implemented a series of powerful policies designed to centralize control and eliminate any potential threats. They moved the capital to a small fishing village called Edo, which we now know as Tokyo, and transformed it into their heavily fortified headquarters. They forced the regional lords, the daimyo, to spend every other year in the capital, effectively keeping them as hostages, and draining their finances with the cost of maintaining 2 lavish residences. But the most famous and radical policy was Sakoku, the closed country policy. The shogunate saw foreign influence, particularly Christianity, as a dangerously destabilizing force. Missionaries had been converting thousands, and the shogunate feared this new loyalty could undermine their authority. So they slammed the door shut. Christianity was brutally suppressed, and Japanese citizens were forbidden from traveling abroad on pain of death. Foreign trade wasn't completely cut off, but it was squeezed into a tiny, tightly controlled bottleneck. The Dutch and the Chinese were the only Europeans and Asians allowed to trade, and only through the single, designated port of Nagasaki. For over 200 years, Japan deliberately turned its back on the rest of the world. Inside this closed-off nation, something incredible happened. An unprecedented era of peace descended upon the land. Without wars to fight, society and culture could flourish in ways Japan had never seen before. The population boomed and cities swelled. Edo, the shogun's capital, grew from a small town into one of the largest cities on the planet, with over 1 million inhabitants. Along with Osaka and the old imperial capital of Kyoto, These urban centers became buzzing hubs of commerce and creativity. A sophisticated network of roads connected the country. And for the first time, a truly national market economy began to emerge, driven by money, not just rice. And all, the culture that blossomed in this peaceful, prosperous urban landscape. This was the age of the ukiyo, the floating world. This term referred to the entertainment districts, the world of theaters, tea houses, and fleeting pleasures, where a new kind of popular culture was born, not for the nobles, but for the common people. It gave us ukiyo-e, the iconic woodblock prints that captured scenes of daily life. Beautiful courtesans, famous actors, and stunning landscapes like Hokusai's The Great Wave. It gave us kabuki theater, with its dramatic makeup, elaborate costumes, and heart-wrenching stories of love, betrayal, and honor. The elegant and mysterious world of the geisha, with their mastery of music, dance, and conversation, was perfected. Even the samurai's code of the warrior Bushido was refined and codified, transforming from a practical battlefield ethic into a philosophical and moral guide for a warrior class with no wars to fight. On the surface, society was rigidly structured. The shogunate enforced a strict, four-tiered social hierarchy, inspired by Confucian ideals. At the top were the samurai, the ruling warrior class. Below them were the farmers and peasants who produced the food that fed the nation and were considered the backbone of society. Next came the artisans who crafted the goods. And at the very bottom were the merchants. In this Confucian system, merchants were seen as parasites, producing nothing of their own and profiting from the work of others. But reality, as it often does, refused to stick to the script. Peace had a strange side effect. The samurai, once fearsome warriors, were now essentially a class of government bureaucrats. With no battles to prove their worth, many fell into debt, struggling to maintain a lifestyle their stipends paid in rice could no longer support. Meanwhile, the merchants, officially at the bottom of the social ladder, were at the top of the economic one. They controlled the flow of money, rice, and goods, and many amassed enormous fortunes. You had this fascinating social inversion where a high-ranking but poor samurai might have to bow his head and respectfully borrow money from a low-ranking but incredibly wealthy merchant. This growing gap between social status and actual wealth created a tension that simmered just beneath the surface of Edo's peaceful society. And the peace wasn't always perfect. The feudal bubble was a fragile one. Japan, being a volcanic archipelago, was frequently struck by earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. These natural disasters often led to widespread famines, like the Great Tenmai Famine in the 1780s, which killed hundreds of thousands and led to riots and social unrest. The shogunate's finances were also a constant source of trouble, as they struggled to manage the complex and changing economy. And despite the closed-door policy, the outside world never truly went away. Through that tiny window in Nagasaki, a trickle of information flowed in. The Dutch brought books on Western science, medicine, and technology, a field of study that became known as Rangaku, or Dutch learning. Japanese scholars eagerly devoured this knowledge, learning about everything from anatomy and astronomy to a strange and distant event called the American Revolution. They knew the world outside was changing and changing fast. They knew about the British Empire's growing influence in Asia, especially its victory over China in the Opium Wars. The shogunate was aware that powerful, industrialized nations with advanced weaponry were sailing the seas. The question wasn't if the outside world would come knocking, but when and with what intentions. They got their answer on a summer day in 1853. The people of Edo looked out into the bay and saw a sight that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. 4 massive ships, unlike any they had ever seen, were gliding toward the shore, moving against the wind and tide. Their hulls were painted a menacing black, and they belched thick columns of smoke into the sky. These were the American steam-powered warships, commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry. The Japanese called them the Kurofwan, the Black Ships, They had come not just with a letter from the American president demanding Japan open its ports. They had come with cannons, with steam power, and with the undeniable force of the 19th century. The peaceful, isolated world of the samurai was about to be shattered forever, and Japan was about to be thrown into the modern world, whether it was ready or not. For over 200 years, Japan was a world unto itself, a land of samurai, shoguns, and ancient traditions sealed off from the outside world by choice. But in 1853, that long silence was shattered by the roar of cannons. Imagine standing on the shores of Edo Bay, watching as massive smoke-belching vessels glide into view. These weren't the familiar wooden ships of Japanese traders. These were the Karafuan, the black ships of the United States Navy, led by Commodore Matthew Perry. When Perry fired his cannons, it wasn't an act of war, but a demonstration, a terrifying display of industrial power. The cannonballs weren't aimed at the city, but at the very heart of Japan's long-held isolation. The message was clear: trade with us, or else. For the Japanese, it was a moment of profound shock. They saw the vast, terrifying gap between a samurai sword and a modern naval gun. Between their feudal society and the industrial might of the West, the ruling shogun, the military dictator of Japan, was in an impossible position. He knew his forces couldn't possibly repel the Americans. So, reluctantly, he agreed to their demands. The Convention of Kanagawa was signed, opening 2 ports to American ships and ending centuries of isolation. This was just the beginning. Soon, other Western powers, Britain, France, Russia, arrived, demanding their own treaties. These weren't agreements between equals. They were what we now call unequal treaties. They gave foreign powers immense control over Japan's trade, tariffs, and even its legal system. Foreigners in Japan were granted extraterritoriality, meaning they were exempt from Japanese laws. To many Japanese, this was a national humiliation. The shogun, who was supposed to be the protector of the realm, was seen as weak and powerless, bowing to foreign pressure. This humiliation lit a fire across the country. A powerful new sentiment began to spread, summed up in a simple, potent slogan: Sanjay Revere, the emperor, expel the barbarians. For centuries, the emperor had been a symbolic figurehead, living in seclusion in Kyoto while the shogun held the real power in Edo. But now, discontented samurai, nobles, and activists began to rally around the emperor. They argued that the shogun had failed Japan, and that only by restoring direct imperial rule could the nation be saved and the foreigners driven out. This wasn't just talk, it was a call to revolution. 2 powerful domains in the south, Choshu and Satsuma, initially fierce rivals, became the centers of this anti-shogunate movement. They had tried to fight the Westerners on their own and learned a brutal lesson. Their traditional samurai armies were no match for modern weaponry. The leaders of these domains had a critical realization: expelling the barbarians was impossible with swords and spears. To resist the West, Japan had to become like the West. They had to modernize. The political situation grew increasingly tense. There were assassinations, skirmishes, and political maneuvering. The shogunate tried to reform, to placate its critics, but it was too little, too late. The tide of history was turning against it. The final shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, tried to navigate this impossible situation. He understood that the old system was crumbling. In 1867, seeing the writing on the wall, he made a momentous decision. He formally abdicated, returning political authority to the emperor. But this peaceful transfer of power was not the end of the story. Hardliners on both sides were not satisfied. In early 1868, radical imperial loyalists from Satsuma and Choshu seized the imperial palace in Kyoto and declared the full restoration of imperial rule. This move pushed the country into open conflict. The Boshin War, or the War of the Year of the Dragon, had begun. It was a civil war that pitted the modernizing armies of the imperial faction against the remaining forces loyal to the old shogunate. It was a clash of old and new Japan. Samurai, armed with traditional weapons, fought alongside troops using rifles and cannons. The war raged for over a year, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The imperial forces, better organized, better equipped, and driven by a clear vision for a new Japan, were victorious. In 1869, the war ended. The last of the shogun's forces surrendered. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled Japan for over 260 years, was officially over. A new era had dawned. The capital was moved from Kyoto to Edo, which was renamed Tokyo, meaning Eastern Capital. And the young emperor, only a teenager, was given the reign name Meiji, which means enlightened rule. This was the Meiji Restoration. But this wasn't just about putting the emperor back in charge. The real revolution was what came next. The young samurai who had led the charge to overthrow the shogun were now in power. They were pragmatists, not idealists. They knew that their old slogan, "Expel the barbarians," was a fantasy. The only way for Japan to survive, to avoid being colonized like so many other nations in Asia, was to transform itself completely. They had to dismantle the entire feudal system that had defined Japan for centuries. This new government embarked on one of the most rapid and radical modernizations the world has ever seen. The samurai class was abolished. The feudal domains were replaced with modern prefectures. A national army was created based on conscription. They sent missions across the world to America and Europe to learn everything they could about Western industry, politics, science, and military strategy. Their new motto became Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country. Strengthen the army. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. In just a few short decades, Japan would leap from a world of samurai to a world of steel, from a landscape of rice paddies to one of railroads. It would transform from a potential victim of Western imperialism into a powerful empire builder in its own right. The fall of the shogun wasn't just the end of an era, it was the explosive beginning of modern Japan, a nation that would soon stun the world and reshape the course of history.
In the mid-19th century, a storm was brewing over Asia. Western powers, with their steamships and cannons, were carving up ancient empires, turning them into colonies. From India to China, the story was the same: submit or be broken. But in the island nation of Japan, a group of determined leaders looked at the world and came to a radical, chilling conclusion. If we don't want to be eaten, we have to become a predator. This wasn't just a stray thought. It became the driving force behind one of the most astonishing and rapid transformations in human history. Welcome to the Meiji Restoration, the period when Japan sprinted from a feudal, isolated society into a modern industrial power in just a few decades. The central idea was captured in a powerful four-character slogan, Fukoku Kei. It means rich country, strong army. This wasn't just propaganda, it was the national policy, the blueprint for survival and, ultimately, for empire. The old Japan had to be completely dismantled to make way for the new. The first step was to centralize power. For centuries, Japan was divided into over 250 feudal domains, each ruled by a powerful lord. The Meiji government abolished this system in one fell swoop. The domains became prefectures, controlled directly by the central government in Tokyo. This was a seismic shock to the old order, and it hit one group particularly hard: the samurai. For centuries, they were the ruling warrior class, the heart of Japan's identity. But in the new Japan, they were seen as a relic of the past. The government began by converting their traditional rice stipends into cash payments and then into government bonds that quickly lost their value. The final blow came in 1873 with the introduction of universal conscription. A modern national army, modeled on the Prussian system, would now be made up of commoners, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. The samurai's exclusive right to bear arms, their very reason for being, was gone. Suddenly, the warrior class had no purpose and no income. This wasn't just a policy change, it was the end of a way of life that had defined Japan for 700 years. With the old structures broken down, the focus shifted to building the rich country part of the equation. And Japan went all-in. The government poured money into creating the infrastructure of a modern state. The first railway line, connecting Tokyo and Yokohama, was completed in 1872. It was a marvel, a symbol of the new era. Soon, tracks were crisscrossing the country, shrinking distances and connecting markets. Telegraph lines were strung up, linking cities in near-instant communication. Factories sprouted from the ground, churning out textiles, cement, and glass. The government built shipyards, determined to create a merchant marine and a navy that could compete on the world stage. To kickstart this industrial revolution, the government initially took the lead, building and operating these new enterprises. But the long-term goal was always private enterprise. In the 1880s, the state began selling these factories and mines to a select group of well-connected entrepreneurs at bargain prices. This policy gave birth to the Zaibatsu, massive family-owned industrial and financial conglomerates that would come to dominate the Japanese economy. Names like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo, which started in this era, are still giants today. They were the engines of Japan's industrialization, working hand in glove with the government to achieve the national mission. But how did Japan learn to do all this so quickly? The answer was simple. They decided to learn from the best. The Meiji government embraced the slogan, Western technology, Japanese spirit. They initiated a massive campaign of learning and adaptation. The Iwakura mission, a diplomatic journey around the world, sent Japan's top officials to the United States and Europe for nearly 2 years. They weren't tourists, they were students, meticulously studying everything from factory management and constitutional law to banking systems and military organization. Thousands of Japanese students were sent abroad to study at Western universities, becoming the experts who would return to build the new Japan. At the same time, Japan invited thousands of foreign expatista, oyatoye gakokujin, to come to Japan. They were teachers, engineers, legal advisors, and military strategists hired at exorbitant salaries to train their Japanese counterparts. The Japanese weren't interested in just blindly copying, though. They were selectively adapting. They looked at the British Navy, the German Army, the French legal system, and the American model of education. And they took what they believed were the best parts of each, molding them to fit Japanese society and culture. This transformation extended to the very heart of government. To be shunned as a civilized nation by the West, Japan knew it needed a modern constitution. After studying various European models, they settled on the Prussian system as their primary inspiration. The Meiji Constitution of 1889 was a gift from the emperor to the people. It created a constitutional monarchy with an elected parliament, the imperial diet. On the surface, it looked like a Western-style democracy, but the real power remained firmly in the hands of the emperor and a small group of unelected elites who advised him. The emperor was declared sacred and inviolable, a divine figurehead who commanded the absolute loyalty of his subjects and had supreme command of the army and navy. It was a system designed for strong, centralized control, dressed in the language of Western modernity. But this top-down revolution came at a huge cost, and it caused massive social upheaval. Who paid for all these railroads, factories, and foreign experts? The peasants. The old, complicated rice tax was replaced with a new, predictable land tax paid in cash. This sounds like a good thing, but it meant that in years of bad harvest, farmers couldn't just pay less. They had to come up with a fixed amount of cash, often forcing them into debt and tenancy. Many lost their land and were forced to become tenants on the very fields their families had worked for generations, or to flock to the cities to become low-wage factory workers. And then there were the disgruntled samurai, stripped of their status, their income, and their purpose. Many felt betrayed by the very government they had helped bring to power. They saw the rapid westernization as a corruption of Japanese values. Anger and frustration boiled over into a series of uprisings throughout the 1870s. The most famous and tragic of these was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. It was led by Sago Takamori, a towering figure of the Restoration who had become disillusioned with the new government's direction. Sago led an army of traditional samurai against the new national army of peasant conscripts. It was the ultimate showdown between the old and new Japan. In a bloody conflict, the samurai, fighting with swords and traditional tactics, were ultimately crushed by the government's modern artillery and rifles. Sago's death marked the end of the samurai class as a military and political force. The era of the warrior was officially over. The path to Fukoku Kyoha was paved with the blood of its own creators. By the early 1890s, the transformation was nearly complete. Japan had a powerful, modern army and navy. It had a booming industrial economy with railways, telegraphs, and factories. It had a centralized government and a national education system instilling loyalty to the emperor. The leaders of the Meiji Restoration had achieved their goal. They had built a rich country and a strong army. They had avoided the fate of China and the rest of Asia. They were no longer the prey. Now, they were a predator, hungry and ambitious, looking out at the world. And with this newfound power, a new, dangerous question began to form in the minds of Japan's elite. Now that we are strong, just how big of an empire do we deserve? The answer would soon plunge East Asia into a new era of conflict, forever changing the course of world history. In modern history, for the first time, an Asian country defeated a European great power. That country wasn't China. It was Japan. This is the story of how a small island nation took on two empires and won, changing the world forever. Welcome back to our series on the history of Japan. In the last chapter, we saw how the Meiji Restoration transformed Japan from an isolated feudal society into a modern, industrializing state. But modernization wasn't just about factories and railroads. It was also about building a powerful military, one that could protect Japan's interests and project its power abroad. The leaders of Meiji Japan looked at the world around them and saw a brutal reality. The strong devoured the weak. Western powers had carved up Africa and were now doing the same to Asia. China, the traditional giant of the region, was being humbled, forced to sign unequal treaties and give up territory. The Japanese leadership was determined that Japan would not suffer the same fate. Instead of being a victim of imperialism, Japan would become an imperialist itself. Its first target was its massive but declining neighbor, Qing China. The stage for this conflict was the Korean Peninsula. For centuries, Korea had been a tributary state of China, but Japan saw it as a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan, a crucial buffer zone that had to be controlled. As Japan's influence in Korea grew, tensions with China escalated. Japan had a brand new, Western-trained army and navy. China's military was larger, but it was poorly organized, riddled with corruption, and equipped with outdated technology. In 1894, war finally broke out. The First Sino-Japanese War was a shocking display of Japan's new military prowess. On land, Japanese forces quickly overran Chinese positions in Korea and pushed into Manchuria. At sea, the Japanese Navy decisively defeated the Chinese Beiyang fleet at the Battle of the Yalu River. It was a swift and brutal victory. Within a year, China was forced to sue for peace. The Treaty of Shimonoseki was a humiliation for China. It had to recognize Korea's independence, effectively handing it over to Japanese influence. It also had to cede the island of Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula in Manchuria to Japan, and pay a massive war indemnity. Japan had done it. It had defeated the regional hegemon and established itself as the new dominant power in East Asia. But Japan's victory lap was cut short. Just days after the treaty was signed, 3 European powers, Russia, Germany, and France, stepped in what became known as the Triple Intervention. They advised Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China. Facing the combined might of 3 European navies, Japan had no choice but to comply. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The Japanese public was outraged. They had won the war, shed blood, and now they were being robbed of their spoils by the Western powers. This humiliation fueled a powerful sense of nationalism and a desire for revenge, especially against the nation that had led the intervention, Russia. The rivalry with Russia quickly became Japan's primary foreign policy concern. Both empires had their eyes on the same prize, Manchuria and Korea. Russia was expanding its influence across Northeast Asia, building the Trans-Siberian Railway and securing a lease for the very same port on the Liaodong Peninsula that Japan had been forced to give up. For Japan, this was an existential threat. A Russia firmly entrenched in Korea and Manchuria would completely undermine Japan's security. Diplomacy failed. Both sides were on a collision course. Japan, feeling it had no other choice, prepared for a war that most of the world thought it could never win. In 1902, Japan scored a major diplomatic victory by signing the Anglo-Japanese Alliance. This was a landmark agreement. For the first time, a Western power had signed a military alliance with a non-Western nation on equal terms. It recognized Japan as a regional power and, crucially, it meant that if Japan went to war with Russia, Britain would remain neutral as long as no other power joined Russia's side. This prevented France from coming to Russia's aid. With its diplomatic flank secured, Japan was ready. On February 8, 1904, without a formal declaration of war. The Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian fleet anchored at Port Arthur on the Liaodong Peninsula. The Russo-Japanese War had begun. The war was brutal and bloody, fought with the deadly new technologies of the 20th century. Machine guns, modern artillery, and barbed wire. It was a preview of the horrors of World War I. The mainland campaign focused on the siege of Port Arthur. 4 months, Japanese soldiers threw themselves against the heavily fortified Russian defenses, suffering horrific casualties. The fighting was some of the most intense the world had ever seen. After a long and bloody siege, Port Arthur finally fell to the Japanese in early 1905. With their Pacific fleet bottled up or destroyed, the Russians made a desperate gamble. They dispatched their Baltic fleet, a massive armada of warships, on an epic journey around the world to relieve their forces in the Far East. The Japanese Navy, under the command of Admiral Togo Heihachiro, lay in wait. The two fleets met in the Tsushima Strait between Korea and Japan in May 1905. What followed was one of the most decisive naval battles in history. Admiral Togo executed a daring maneuver, crossing the T of the Russian formation, allowing his ships to bring all their guns to bear while the Russians could only fire their forward guns. The result was a complete and utter annihilation of the Russian fleet. Of the 38 Russian ships that entered the strait, 21 were sunk, 7 were captured, and 6 were disarmed in neutral ports. Only a handful escaped. The Japanese lost just 3 torpedo boats. The Battle of Tsushima sent shockwaves around the globe. A nation had not just defeated, but had utterly crushed the navy of a major European empire. The world was stunned. The victory was a source of immense pride for Japan, and an inspiration for anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa. Russia, facing defeat abroad and revolution at home, had no choice but to seek peace. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt mediated the negotiations, earning him the Nobel Peace Prize. The resulting Treaty of Portsmouth gave Japan control over Korea and southern Manchuria, including Port Arthur. Japan had done the unthinkable. It had joined the exclusive club of industrial imperial powers. It now had a seat at the table with the great powers of the West, negotiating treaties and shaping international affairs. The victory cemented the military's prestige and influence within the Japanese government, and it fueled an even greater sense of national destiny and ambition. When World War I broke out in 1914, Japan saw another opportunity. It joined the war on the side of the Allies, but its real goal was not to fight in Europe. It was to expand its own empire in Asia. Japan quickly seized Germany's colonial possessions in China and the Pacific. It then issued the 21 demands to China, a set of aggressive political and economic demands that would have essentially turned China into a Japanese protectorate. While some of the harshest demands were dropped due to international pressure, it was a clear signal of Japan's growing ambitions. By the end of the war, Japan's position as a world power was undeniable. It had a powerful military, a growing industrial economy, and a burgeoning empire that stretched from Taiwan to the Central Pacific. It had proven that an Asian nation could master Western technology and play the imperial game just as ruthlessly as any European power. Japan had taken its seat at the imperial table, but the longer it sat there, the bigger its ambitions became, and soon its gaze would extend far beyond East Asia, setting it on a path that would lead to even greater triumphs, and ultimately to a catastrophic downfall. What happens when this rising empire's ambitions clash with those of the United States? Ever wondered how a country can go from flapper, dresses, jazz, cafes, and lively political debates to full-blown military aggression in just a few years? That's the story of Japan in the early 20th century. In the 1920s, during what's known as the Taisho period, Japan was buzzing with change. It had political parties, elections, a press that wasn't afraid to speak its mind, and vibrant modern art. Cities were expanding, a new middle class was emerging, and it really looked like a new democracy was finding its footing in Asia. But then the music stopped, the economy crashed, and the sound of guns began to replace the sound of debate. How did it all go so wrong, so fast? Let's dive into the dramatic shift from the so-called Taisho democracy to the dark road of militarism. The story really starts with World War I. While Europe was tearing itself apart, Japan was cleverly positioning itself on the world stage. It sided with the Allies, took over German territories in the Pacific and China, and, most importantly, its economy boomed. With European factories shut down for war production, the world needed goods, and Japan was ready to supply them. Exports of textiles, machinery, and all sorts of products skyrocketed. This industrial boom pulled millions of people from the countryside into rapidly growing cities like Tokyo and Osaka. A new urban middle class of office workers, teachers, and shopkeepers began to form. They had disposable income. They read newspapers and magazines, went to movies, and started to participate in a new kind of mass culture. This period also saw a rise in social movements. Labor unions organized strikes for better wages and working conditions. Women's groups campaigned for suffrage and greater rights. University students debated radical ideas like socialism and anarchism. It felt like a society opening up, becoming more modern and democratic. In 1925, Japan even passed a law granting universal male suffrage, meaning all men over 25 could vote regardless of how much money they had. It was a huge step, and for a moment, it seemed like the political parties in the Diet, Japan's parliament, were genuinely in control. But underneath this shiny surface, deep cracks were forming. The economic boom of the war years was fragile. Once the war ended and European industries recovered, Japanese exports faced stiff competition. The economy went through a series of ups and downs. But the real knockout blow came in 1929 with the Great Depression. The global economic collapse was a catastrophe for Japan, a nation that relied heavily on international trade. Its biggest export market, the United States, slammed its doors shut with high tariffs. The price of silk, a key export produced by millions of rural families, plummeted. Suddenly, the farmers who had been struggling even during the good times were pushed to the brink of starvation. In the cities, factories closed, unemployment soared, and the social tensions that had been simmering now boiled over. The dream of the 1920s turned into a nightmare. People were desperate, and they started looking for someone to blame. And many people found their target. the politicians, and the big business conglomerates. The to the public. It seemed like the party politicians were corrupt, self-serving, and completely out of touch with the suffering of ordinary people. They were seen as being in the pockets of big business, enriching themselves while the country starved. This growing disgust with the civilian government created a dangerous power vacuum, and there was one group that was more than ready to step in and fill it: the military. Within the Japanese Imperial Army and Navy, a powerful ideology was taking hold. Money officers, especially younger ones from rural backgrounds, saw the suffering of their families firsthand. They came to believe that the politicians had betrayed the nation. They felt that parliamentary democracy was a weak, decadent Western import that was corrupting Japan's unique spirit. They believed the only way to save Japan was to get rid of the corrupt politicians and capitalists, restore the emperor to his rightful place at the center of power, and expand Japan's empire to secure the resources it desperately needed. This wasn't just talk. This ideology began to translate into violent action. The 1930s became a decade of political terror. A secret society of naval officers assassinated Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi in 1932 because he opposed the militarist unauthorized actions in Manchuria. This was just one of many assassinations and attempted coups. Each act of violence further intimidated the civilian government. The politicians became terrified of standing up to the military, fearing they would be next. The press was censored, and anyone who criticized the military's growing power was silenced. The police, particularly the thought police, or TAK, hunted down communists, socialists, and anyone deemed disloyal. The vibrant, open society of the Taisho era was systematically dismantled. The military wasn't staging a single, clean coup. Instead, it was a slow, creeping takeover, a process of gaining influence through fear, violence, and popular discontent. The military's first major move on the world stage was in Manchuria, a region in northeastern China rich in coal, iron, and land. Japan already had troops stationed there to protect its railway interests. In 1931, a group of radical army officers staged an incident, blowing up a small section of the railway track near They then blamed it on Chinese saboteurs and used it as a pretext to launch a full-scale invasion of Manchuria. This was a direct act of insubordination. The government in Tokyo was completely bypassed. When the civilian prime minister tried to de-escalate the situation, he was ignored. The army acted on its own, and the public, tired of the weak government and desperate for good news, largely cheered them on. Within months, the army had conquered the entire region. In 1932, they established the puppet state of Manchukuo, installing the last emperor of China, Pui, as its figurehead ruler. In reality, Manchukuo was a colony ruthlessly exploited for its resources to fuel Japan's heavy industries and military machine. The international community, through the League of Nations, condemned Japan's aggression. What was Japan's response? It walked out of the League of Nations in 1933, isolating itself and signaling its rejection of the existing world order. The invasion of Manchuria was a turning point. It normalized aggression. It taught the military that they could act with impunity, both at home and abroad. The government had lost control, and the army was now driving Japan's foreign policy. And their ambitions didn't stop at Manchuria. They saw it as just the first step in creating a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a Japanese-dominated bloc that would expel Western colonial powers and secure Asia's resources for Japan. The rhetoric was always defensive. We are protecting our interests. We are liberating Asia. But the reality was a brutal campaign of conquest. In 1937, a small clash between Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing quickly escalated into a full-scale, undeclared war. The conflict would drag on for 8 long years, causing immense suffering and devastation. So, we see a nation's path fundamentally altered. The promising democratic experiment of the 1920s was completely shattered by an economic crisis that discredited civilian leaders and a radicalized military that offered a simple, violent solution. They promised strength, stability, and national glory, and a desperate population was willing to listen. The military's takeover wasn't a sudden event, but a gradual poisoning of the political system through assassinations, intimidation, and rogue actions that the government was too weak to stop. Each step, from the invasion of Manchuria to the full-blown war in China, was justified as a necessary defensive measure. But this path, the one that started with a supposed need to protect our interests in Manchuria, was leading Japan somewhere far darker. The journey from a regional conflict to a global war against the Allied powers would prove to be much shorter and much more catastrophic than anyone could have imagined. What happens when a nation, convinced of its own righteousness and driven by military ambition, finds itself on a collision course with the rest of the world? It's just before 8 in the morning on December 7th, 1941, at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The sky is filled with the roar of engines and the explosions of falling bombs. The Japanese Empire has launched a surprise attack on the United States Pacific Fleet. In just a few hours, Japanese leaders will believe they have crippled their greatest rival and secured victory in the Pacific. They are wrong. They have just signed their nation's death warrant and started the countdown to its own destruction. This war didn't begin at Pearl Harbor. For Japan, it had been raging for years. In 1937, what started as a border incident with China exploded into a full-scale invasion. The Second Sino-Japanese War was a brutal affair. Japanese forces, driven by a belief in their own racial superiority and a fanatical military code, swept across China. Cities fell, and the resistance was met with unimaginable cruelty. The world was shocked by reports of atrocities, most infamously the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and unarmed soldiers were systematically murdered. Japan was trying to bomb China into submission, but the vast country and its resilient people simply refused to break. This endless war in China was a massive drain on Japan's resources. The military-controlled government realized they were running out of everything, especially oil. America, disapproving of Japan's aggression, had imposed a crippling oil embargo. Without it, Japan's war machine would grind to a halt in months. So, they looked south. The resource-rich European colonies in Southeast Asia, the Dutch East Indies, British Malaya, French Indochina, were ripe for the picking. Europe was engulfed in its own war with Nazi Germany, leaving their colonial possessions vulnerable. Japan's leaders saw a golden opportunity: seize these territories, secure the resources they needed, and create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, which was really just a nice name for a Japanese-dominated empire. But there was one major obstacle standing in their way: the United States and its powerful Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese High Command, led by figures like Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, devised a daring all-or-nothing plan. They would launch a surprise attack to destroy the American fleet in a single, devastating blow. They hoped this would shatter American morale and force the US to negotiate, giving Japan a free hand in Asia. It was an incredible gamble, and so, on that quiet Sunday morning, the gamble was made. Japanese carrier-based planes struck Pearl Harbor with shocking precision. They sank or damaged numerous battleships, destroyed hundreds of aircraft, and killed over 2,000 Americans. On paper, it was a stunning tactical victory, but it was a catastrophic strategic failure. Crucially, the American aircraft carriers, which would become the most important naval weapon of the war, were out at sea and escaped unharmed. More importantly, instead of breaking America's will, the attack united a furious nation and ignited a burning desire for revenge. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy, and America declared war. Japan had awakened a sleeping giant. In the first 6 months after Pearl Harbor, it seemed like Japan's gamble might actually pay off. They launched a blitzkrieg across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Burma, they all fell in rapid succession. Japanese soldiers seemed invincible. They overran Allied forces, captured tens of thousands of prisoners, and expanded their empire at a breathtaking pace. Their propaganda hailed these victories as the dawn of a new Asian order, freed from Western colonialism. But for the people they conquered, it was often just the exchange of one master for a much harsher one. The tide, however, was about to turn. The first major check on Japanese expansion came at the Battle of the Coral Sea. But the true turning point, the moment the war in the Pacific was fundamentally altered. Up in it in June 1942, near a tiny atoll called Midway, American codebreakers had deciphered Japanese naval communications and knew exactly where and when the next major attack would be. The US Navy set a trap. In a single disastrous day, the Japanese Navy lost 4 of its most important aircraft carriers, the very heart of its naval power. These were losses they could never replace. Midway was a devastating blow from which Japan's navy would never fully recover. The initiative had now passed to the Allies, and the long, bloody fight back across the Pacific began. This wasn't a war of grand European-style battles, but a brutal island-by-island slog. Places like Guadalcanal became synonymous with hell on earth. American Marines and Japanese soldiers fought each other with savage intensity in dense jungles, unforgiving heat, and disease-ridden swamps. On these islands, surrender was not an option for the Japanese soldier, who was taught that to be captured was the ultimate dishonor. They fought to the last man, launching suicidal banzai charges and turning every cave and pillbox into a fortress. For the Americans, It was a grim lesson in the fanaticism of their enemy and a preview of the horrific costs that would be required to defeat Japan. As the Allies slowly advanced, the war became a total war of annihilation. American industrial might kicked into high gear, producing ships, planes, and tanks at a rate Japan could never hope to match. The skies over Japan, once safe, were now filled with American B-29 Superfortress bombers. Initially, they conducted high-altitude precision bombing, but it proved ineffective. So, American strategy shifted to something far more terrifying: low-altitude firebombing using incendiary bombs. These raids created massive firestorms that consumed Japan's cities, which were largely built of wood and paper. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 was the single most destructive air raid in human history, killing an estimated 100,000 people in one night and burning a huge portion of the city to the ground. City after city was incinerated. The Japanese people, who had been told they were winning a glorious war, were now living in a literal inferno. By the summer of 1945, Japan was on its knees. Its navy was at the bottom of the ocean. Its air force was destroyed, and its cities were smoldering ruins. Its armies were cut off and starving on isolated islands across the Pacific. Yet, the military leadership in Tokyo refused to surrender. They prepared for a final, desperate defense of the home islands, vowing to arm every man, woman, and child with bamboo spears if necessary. They believed the spirit of the Japanese people could overcome American material superiority. U.S. military planners, looking at the fanaticism displayed on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, estimated that an invasion of Japan could cost over 1 million Allied casualties and many millions of Japanese lives. President Harry Truman, who had taken office after Roosevelt's death, was presented with another Apshana new, secret weapon of unimaginable power. On August 6, 1945, AB-29 named the Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima and dropped a single bomb. The world's first atomic bomb detonated, instantly vaporizing the city center and killing tens of thousands of people. 3 days later, with Japan's leadership still deadlocked and refusing to surrender, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The day after the Nagasaki bombing, the Soviet Union, honoring a pledge to the Allies, declared war on Japan and launched a massive invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria, quickly crushing Japan's last significant army on the continent. Faced with this overwhelming combination of atomic destruction and a new Soviet front, the choice was finally clear. There was no way. Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented move, intervened and broke the deadlock. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese people heard the voice of their divine emperor for the first time, announcing over the radio that Japan would accept the Allied terms of unconditional surrender. The war was over. The empire built on conquest and military might was now a shattered, occupied nation. The cities were rubble, the people were starving, and the dream of a Japanese-led Asia was dead. But this wasn't just the end of a war. It was the end of an entire era for Japan and the people who would soon arrive to rewrite the country's constitution, its government, and its very way of life would not be Japanese.
Imagine this scene. It's late 1945. Tokyo is in ruins. In a grand office building, an American general, Douglas MacArthur, sits down with his team. Their mission: to rewrite the entire future of a nation that, just months ago, was America's most bitter enemy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. This is the story of how Japan went from a sprawling empire to a pacifist nation, a change so profound it echoes to this day. After the unconditional surrender, Japan wasn't just defeated, it was occupied. The Allied powers, led overwhelmingly by the United States, swarmed into the country. Their first orders of business were clear: dismantle the war machine. Swords were melted down, tanks were scrapped, and the once mighty Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were completely dissolved. This was total disarmament. Alongside this, the top leaders who had orchestrated the war were put on trial in Tokyo for war crimes. A reckoning for the devastation they had unleashed across Asia. The old guard was being systematically removed. But the most symbolic change of all involved the man at the very top, Emperor Hirohito. For centuries, the emperor was considered a living god, a divine being descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu. This belief was a cornerstone of Japanese nationalism and militarism. But under pressure from the occupiers, something unprecedented happened. In a radio address to the nation on New Year's Day 1946, Emperor Hirohito renounced his divinity. He declared he was a mortal man, just like his subjects. It was a seismic shock to the national identity. Overnight, the divine emperor became a human symbol, a constitutional monarch with no political power, much like the King or Queen of England. The spiritual pillar of the old empire had been removed, making way for something entirely new. And that new thing was the 1947 Constitution, often called the MacArthur Constitution because of how heavily his team influenced its drafting. This document was revolutionary for Japan. It established a British-style parliamentary democracy, where the Prime Minister and the Cabinet were chosen by and accountable to the Diet, Japan's elected parliament. It enshrined a Bill of Rights that guaranteed fundamental freedoms: freedom of speech, assembly, and religion, things that had been severely restricted during the war. It was a complete overhaul of the political system designed to put power in the hands of the people, not a militaristic elite. But the most famous and controversial part of this new constitution is Article 9. This short but powerful clause is a radical statement of pacifism. In it, Japan forever renounces war as a sovereign right and declares that it will never again maintain land, sea, or air forces with war potential. Essentially, Japan was constitutionally forbidden from having an offensive military. It could only maintain a small self-defense force for its own protection. This was a direct response to the aggressive imperialism of the past decades. The goal was to ensure Japan could never again threaten its neighbors or the world. A nation once defined by its military might was now legally bound to peace. The American-led reforms didn't stop at politics and the military. They aimed to reshape Japanese society from the ground up. One of the biggest changes was land reform. Before the war, much of Japan's farmland was owned by a small class of wealthy landlords, while millions of tenant farmers lived in poverty. The occupation authorities broke up these large estates and sold the land to the farmers who actually worked it. This created a new class of independent, land-owning farmers, stabilizing the countryside and boosting agricultural productivity. Simultaneously, the urban workforce was empowered. Labor unions, which had been suppressed under the military government, were now legalized and encouraged. Workers gained the right to organize, bargain collectively, and strike for better wages and conditions. And in a monumental step for equality, women were granted the right to vote and run for office for the first time in Japanese history. These social reforms were designed to democratize Japan, not just in theory, but in practice, empowering ordinary people who had been shut out of power for so long. Now, let's be clear. These early post-war years were incredibly difficult. The country was shattered, cities were flattened, and millions were homeless and starving. Japan was utterly dependent on American aid, receiving shipments of food and supplies just to survive. The once proud empire was now a poor, defeated nation, grappling with a completely new identity imposed upon it by its former enemy. It was a period of immense hardship and uncertainty. But beneath the surface of this poverty, the seeds of a miracle were being planted. The new constitution, the democratic reforms, the empowered workers and farmer Saul, these elements were laying a new foundation. Japan had lost everything that once defined its power: its colonies, its massive army, and its dream of conquering Asia through force. It was humbled, disarmed, and seemingly adrift in a new world order. But as the rubble was being cleared, a different kind of ambition began to stir. The nation was about to pivot, to channel its discipline, its energy, and its ingenuity into a new kind of battle and economic one. Japan had given up the sword, but it was about to pick up a briefcase, and in doing so, it would build a new kind of power that would stun the world. The era of the economic miracle was about to begin. Imagine this: 1945. Tokyo is a landscape of rubble and ash. The once mighty Japanese empire lies defeated. The future looks bleak, almost non-existent. Now, fast forward just 40 years to the mid-1980s. The world is watching in awe. And a little bit of fear as Japanese companies start buying up iconic American landmarks. First, Columbia Pictures, then Rockefeller Center. There are whispers, half joking, half serious, that Japan might just buy the entire world. How did this happen? How did a nation rise from total devastation to become an economic superpower in a single generation? This is the story of Japan's economic miracle and the spectacular bubble that brought it all crashing down. To understand this incredible transformation, we need to go back to the ashes of World War II. The Cold War was just beginning, and the United States saw a strategic opportunity. Instead of punishing Japan, America decided to rebuild it as a democratic, capitalist bastion against the spread of communism in Asia. This wasn't just about goodwill, it was geopolitics. The US poured in aid, opened its markets to Japanese goods, and provided a security umbrella that allowed Japan to focus almost entirely on one thing: its economy. This strategic partnership lit the initial fuse for the rocket that was about to launch. But external help alone doesn't explain the miracle. The real engine was inside Japan. A unique form of capitalism emerged, often called Japan Incorporated. It was a powerful partnership between three key players. First, the government, especially the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI. They weren't central planners in the communist sense, but they acted as strategic guides, identifying promising industries and helping them grow with subsidies, loans, and protection from foreign competition. Second, the massive corporate conglomerates known as keiretsu. These were families of companies like Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, and Mitsui that included a major bank, a trading company, and manufacturers in various sectors. They worked together, shared technology, and supported each other, creating powerful, integrated industrial giants. And third, the workforce. The system of lifetime employment became the norm in big companies. In exchange for unwavering loyalty and hard work, employees were guaranteed a job from graduation to retirement. This created an incredibly stable, dedicated, and skilled labor force. This three-pronged system: government guidance, corporate collaboration, and a loyal workforce created an environment perfectly tuned for rapid, export-led growth. Japan wasn't trying to make everything. It was strategically targeting specific global markets. Think about the products that defined the late 20th century. Chances are, many of them were Japanese. The strategy was brilliant. In the 1950s and 60s, it was textiles and simple goods. Then, they moved up the value chain. By the 1970s, it was all about cars. Brands like Toyota and Honda didn't just compete with American and European automakers. They redefined the industry with their focus on fuel efficiency, reliability, and innovative production methods like the just-in-time system. They proved that high quality and low cost could go hand in hand. Then came the 1980s, the golden age of Japanese electronics. Sony, Panasonic, Nintendo. The Walkman changed how we listen to music. The VCR changed how we watch movies. The Nintendo Entertainment System created the modern video game industry. These weren't just products, they were cultural phenomena, symbols of Japanese ingenuity and quality that took over the world. By the mid-1980s, the results were undeniable. Japan had surpassed West Germany to become the world's second-largest economy, trailing only the United States. Its trade surplus was enormous. Its banks were the largest in the world. Japan Inc. became a global buzzword, studied in business schools everywhere as the ultimate model of efficiency, discipline, and long-term planning. The image was one of tireless salarymen in dark suits, futuristic factories run by robots, and a society that seemed to have perfected the art of economic conquest. The world was convinced that the 21st century would be the Japanese century. But beneath this gleaming surface of success, a dangerous pressure was building. The very success of Japan Inc. had created a torrent of cash, and that money had to go somewhere. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. With huge trade surpluses and a strong yen, Japanese companies and banks were swimming in capital. Interest rates were kept incredibly low to stimulate the domestic economy, and so began one of the most spectacular asset bubbles in modern history. The money poured into two main areas, the stock market and real estate. The Nikkei 225, Japan's main stock index, went on a tear, tripling in value in just 4 years, from 1985 to 1989. It seemed like you couldn't lose money. Everyone from corporations to housewives was playing the market. But the real insanity was in real estate. Prices in Tokyo became legendary. Stories circulated that the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than the entire state of California. A tiny apartment in the city could cost millions of dollars. Golf club memberships, treated as tradable assets, were selling for hundreds of thousands. This wasn't based on fundamentals. It was pure speculation. People borrowed massive sums of money, using their inflated property as collateral to buy more property or stocks, pushing prices even higher in a dangerous feedback loop. The feeling was one of invincible euphoria. Japan wasn't just rich, it felt like it had discovered a secret to perpetual wealth. But as we know, bubbles always burst. The end came swiftly. In late 1989, the Bank of Japan, finally concerned about the runaway speculation, began to raise interest rates to cool the economy down. It was like pulling the plug. The stock market peaked on the very last trading day of the decade, and then the slide began. Throughout 1990, the Nikkei index plummeted, eventually losing over 60% of its value. The real estate market followed soon after. The collateral that had fueled the boom suddenly became worthless. Companies and individuals who had borrowed heavily were now bankrupt. The banks were left holding trillions of yen in bad loans. The crash was brutal, wiping out an estimated $15 trillion in wealth, more than twice Japan's GDP at the time. The party was over. What followed was not a quick recovery, but a slow, grinding period of economic stagnation that came to be known as the lost decade. And then that decade stretched into 2, and some would argue, even 3. The vibrant, dynamic economy of the 1980s was replaced by one struggling with deflation, a persistent fall in prices that discourages spending and investment. Growth flatlined. The lifetime employment system began to crack, replaced by more temporary and part-time work. Government debt soared as they tried to stimulate the economy with massive spending projects. The mood of the nation shifted from boundless optimism to a kind of quiet resignation. So what can we learn from this epic rise and fall? Japan's story is a powerful lesson. It shows how a nation can achieve incredible things through focus, innovation, and social cohesion. But it's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of speculative excess and the illusion of easy money. The military empire of the 1940s had collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Now, half a century later, the economic empire had hit a wall, brought down by its own success. Japan's challenge was no longer about conquering global markets. It was about learning to live in a new reality, world of slow growth, an aging population, and the quiet search for a new identity in a century it was once expected to dominate. The miracle was over, and the long, difficult work of reinvention had just begun. When you think of Japan today, what comes to mind? For millions around the world, it's a vibrant tapestry of anime, manga, video games, and fashion. It's the cool Japan that dominates global pop culture. But behind the dazzling neon lights of Shibuya and the worldwide appeal of its creative industries, Japan is grappling with profound questions about its identity and future in the 21st century. So, how did Japan become this cultural superpower? After the economic boom of the post-war era, a new kind of influence began to emerge. It wasn't built on military might or economic dominance, but on creativity and imagination. This is what's often called soft power. In the 1980s and 90s, Japanese video games from companies like Nintendo and Sony conquered the world. Then came the global explosion of anime like Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and later, the works of Studio Ghibli. Manga, Japanese comics, became a billion-dollar industry, with titles like Naruto and One Piece captivating audiences far beyond Japan's shores. This cultural wave extended to everything. J-pop idols gained international followings. Japanese fashion, from the avant-garde designs of Rei Kawakubo to the street styles of Harajuku, influenced runways everywhere. And of course, there's the food. Sushi, ramen, and tempura are now global staples. The Japanese government itself recognized this phenomenon, launching the Cool Japan initiative to actively promote these cultural exports. Japan had successfully branded itself as a hub of innovation, quality, and undeniable coolness. It had become a cultural icon, but while the world was falling in love with Pikachu and Totoro, Japan itself was navigating a much more complex and uncertain reality. The end of the Cold War completely changed the geopolitical landscape. For decades, Japan had thrived under the security umbrella of the United States, its foreign policy anchored by its unique pacifist constitution. Article 9 of that constitution famously renounces war and the maintenance of military forces. This has been a cornerstone of Japan's post-war identity. However, the world around Japan was becoming less stable. The rise of China as a military and economic powerhouse, North Korea's unpredictable nuclear ambitions, and shifting alliances created new security anxieties. Suddenly, the old framework seemed inadequate. This has sparked one of the most intense and divisive debates in modern Japanese society. Should Article 9 be revised? Should Japan remilitarize and take on a more assertive security role in the region? This debate cuts to the very heart of what it means to be Japanese in the modern era. On one side are those who argue that Japan must adapt to a more dangerous world, that it cannot rely forever on others for its defense. They advocate for a normal country with a full-fledged military. On the other side are those who passionately defend the pacifist constitution, seeing it as a vital lesson learned from the horrors of World War II and a unique contribution to world peace. They fear that changing it would open the door to repeating the mistakes of the past. This tension between its pacifist identity and the strategic realities of the 21st century remains a defining challenge for Japan. And the challenges don't stop at its borders. Internally, Japan is facing a demographic crisis unlike any other in the developed world. It is, simply put, the oldest country on Earth. A rapidly aging population combined with one of the lowest birth rates globally has created a perfect storm. The population is shrinking. Every year, there are fewer young people to enter the workforce and support a growing number of retirees. This has led to severe labor shortages in key sectors like construction, nursing, and agriculture. The logical solution for many countries would be immigration. But for a nation that has long prided itself on its ethnic and cultural homogeneity, opening the doors to large-scale immigration is a deeply contentious issue. While policies are slowly changing, Japan remains far from embracing a multicultural model in the way that countries like Canada or Australia have. How Japan resolves this demographic puzzle will shape its economy and society for decades to come. The economic pressures are compounded by persistent social issues. The image of the tireless Japanese salaryman is famous, but it has a dark side. The phenomenon of karoshi, or death from overwork, highlights the extreme pressures of Japanese work culture. Another deeply concerning issue is hikikomori, or acute social withdrawal, where hundreds of thousands of individuals, mostly men, completely isolate themselves from society, sometimes for years on end. These are symptoms of a society grappling with intense pressure, conformity, and a changing economic landscape where the promise of lifetime employment has faded. After the miracle decades, Japan's economic growth slowed considerably. It now faces stiff competition not just from the West, but from its dynamic neighbors like South Korea and a booming China, who have challenged Japan's dominance in technology and manufacturing. The days of Japan being the undisputed economic leader of Asia are over. It's easy to paint a picture of a nation in decline. A cool but troubled country, haunted by its past and anxious about its future. And while these challenges are very real, they are only part of the story. It's crucial to remember that Japan remains one of the world's most stable, wealthy, and innovative democracies. It has one of the highest life expectancies on the planet. Its cities are famously safe, clean, and efficient. It is a global leader in robotics, engineering, and scientific research. Its society, while facing pressures, is also incredibly resilient, orderly, and cohesive. The story of contemporary Japan is not one of decline, but of transformation. It's the story of a mature, advanced nation confronting the complex problems of the 21st century head-on. The questions it's asking itself about national identity, security, demographic change, and social well-being are questions that many other developed nations will soon have to face. And so our series comes to a close. We've traced an incredible arc. It's from forest tribes to neon megacities, from samurai swords to industrial robots, from ruthless conqueror to self-declared pacifist nation. The history of Japan is the story of a people constantly rewriting themselves. They have absorbed and adapted, innovated and endured. And every time they reinvent who they are, the rest of the world has to pay attention. Japan's journey is a powerful reminder that history never really ends. It just enters a new chapter. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible exploration of Japanese history. If you've enjoyed this series, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might find it interesting. We'll see you next time.